Pittsburgh Steeler fans, it is time once again for another edition of the Curtain Call podcast. My name is Michael Beck, deputy editor of BehindTheSteelCurtain.com, hanging out with you as always by the one, the only Mr. Geoffrey, Benedict. Geoffrey, how are you doing tonight, sir?
Doing good, Mike.
Lovely. Now, there's clearly been a lot of news in the last week or so in Steelers Nation, I suppose you could say. One of the smaller things that have kind of bubbled out today is Juju Smith-Schuster and his kind of thoughts on wanting to stay here in Pittsburgh. Do you think there's any world where it makes sense for the team to bring Juju back this year? And do you see a move like that actually happening?
I can't see it happening. It's just like we have three receivers. Like the replacement level for Juju is a guy that's already on the team. You know what I'm saying? Like James Washington is your replacement for Juju Smith-Schuster. The drop-off between him and Juju is nowhere near what Juju Smith-Schuster is going to get paid. So to me, he's one of those guys. I divide up my guys into categories of like, are they more valuable to us than they are to other teams? Are they equal, or are they like less valuable to us than they would be to other teams? Juju's less valuable to us simply because we have people in place, and he doesn't fit what we're doing on offense right now. Like production wise, he's not gonna produce here.
Yeah, and with that, there's the Steelers obviously have a little bit of issues with cap spacing right now, and for a team that doesn't spend a whole lot of money on receivers after their rookie contracts are up, giving someone like Juju a big money deal doesn't necessarily make a ton of sense. But the Steelers are starting to make some moves when it comes to getting to that bar, that salary cap bar, getting back to even. Cam Hayward restructuring his deal. There's a couple other names that could pop up. Who do you expect those next moves to be for the Steelers to get that money back into the green?
I think Stephon Tuitt. I know he's already restructured his deal once, and we're pushing a lot of money down the road in his contract to the point that he's right now the number 3. He's the number 3 cap hit on the team. But he's got a $9 million base salary. That leaves you a lot of room to work with. He's only under contract through next year, though, so you can push $4.5 million back farther. But you're going to have to pay him next year then, because it's the end. But I guess with his age, you can always extend him too. So it's workable.
Right. Now, the other big news story of the week was one Mr. Ben Roethlisberger. And I think we're going to spend a lot of time in the second half of our show breaking down Ben Roethlisberger and obviously what all this news means for the Steelers, means for Ben, and I guess even means for what our topic of today's show really is going to be on the draft, because there's going to be some heavy implications of Ben coming back for at least another season. So really kind of just getting into the topic of today's show. I'm curious, Geoffrey, are you a big of a draft nut as someone, I guess like me, could say that I am?
I am not. I'm really not. I will follow a few players. I'll follow a few positions. Every year I tend to look at like one need of the Steelers and really try to dive into players. But my problem with being a draft nut is I like to watch the film. I like to look at the stats. College game does not have great statistics. You don't have the same level of statistics, and I don't have access to the all 22 film. You know, I love the players, like the people that are on YouTube that have access to that. That's awesome. I'll watch it just because you get to see that. But without the all 22 film, there's so many positions you really can't judge well.
Yeah, and then when it comes to some of those stats as well, like if someone on a great team, you kind of got to throw those stats out the window. But then someone like Alex Highsmith a year ago playing for Charlotte, a virtually brand new football program in Division I, lighting up the league, and he was in the top 3 of sacks in the nation. All of a sudden, a stat like that shoots players up to the top. So, well, I guess with all that being said, though, I know you still have a couple players that you consider your favorite prospects of this draft. So, with if you're able to share a name with us, who's your favorite prospect?
I know this is incredibly unlikely simply because of the situation the Steelers are in, the needs they have, and the position the guy plays. But I am a huge fan of Christian Barmore from Alabama. He reminds me a lot of Cam Hayward and Stephon Tuitt, almost like a cross between them. He's like Stephon Tuitt in that he has two moves. He's got a bull rush and a swim move, the exact same combo that Stephon Tuitt brings. And he does the exact same thing with it. He drives into your backfield and wrecks your play. Doesn't put up great stats, which is kind of a Steelers hallmark of guys they go for on the defensive line. These guys that weren't big stat producers, but on film just show up. He's also sounds like everything I'm hearing about him. Again, caveats there. What you hear coming out about the draft in reality can be a lot different. He seems like a leader. He seems very intelligent. He reminds me a lot of a Cam Hayward and a Stephon Tuitt kind of combo. And he would be a guy you could just draft and plug in there and be like, you know, you're gonna play with Cam Hayward for a few years, and then you're gonna take over being that kind of leader.
Oh, when I look at it from my perspective, being that big draft guy, boy, oh boy, is it hard to just share one name. Like I'm repping a certain school this evening for reasons we'll get to later. But outside of Trey Lance, quarterback from North Dakota State, oh man, like we've talked about before, Zaven Collins, linebacker that can do everything, I think could really change the complexion of this team and even take it another step further, kind of like what we saw in Tampa Bay. But really, to me, factoring what the Steelers are trying to do and who they're going to try to, I guess, target in the draft, someone like Christian Darrisaw, if he's there, the big left tackle from Virginia Tech, oh man, that would be an outstanding pick. It's very easy to fall in love with a player like that. Now, when it comes to positional needs, that's when stuff kind of gets tricky when it comes to the draft, Geoffrey. Do you think the Steelers might try to target someone that fills the hole for them, or are they still in best player available mode?
Well, this brings up something I would actually like to dive into a little. Is how the Steelers approach the draft. And I've said things before, but I want to, if you'll humor me here, I want to go into it a little deeper. Like, for example, Michael, first round pick. How many positions can you look at the Steelers roster right now and say, man, you could use a first round pick on that position, regardless of the talent available, like regardless of the draft, what you know of who's available in the draft? What positions would you eliminate from that list and say, this position would make no sense to spend a first round pick on this year?
Free safety. Probably defensive tackle. That seems like it's about it.
Yeah. Maybe guard specific, like an only guard guy. Like there's so few positions you can look at and say, no, a first round pick there would be bad. Obviously kicker, punter, that would be bad no matter what year. But how the Steelers address the draft kind of flows into that. Like if you extend that to first, second, and third round, you could see any position on this team being drafted in any of those spots if the right player hits there. But at the same time, there's not a single player in the draft you can look at and say, we can get this guy at the optimal position. If you're going to say we're going to draft one guy, you're going to have to take them before they probably should be taken just to get that guy. Like we've seen the Steelers do that. Like, for example, Terrell Edmonds, I believe they went after him because of his athletic profile. They wanted that athleticism at strong safety, so they had to take him before he probably should have been taken, because otherwise you're probably not getting him. But outside of like that kind of a situation, you're taking best player available, which is how the Steelers approach the draft is the best way to do it, but also how they approach free agency. Because now you're looking at, okay, if we're going to just go best player available in the draft and we're going to take whoever's there, whoever's best on our list, then you have to enter the draft without a need. You have to enter the draft in your mind with every position. Okay, we can go into the regular season with this. And one of my best examples is 2018 to 2019. 2018, the Steelers had Vince Williams and John Bostic. There were a bunch of inside linebackers. They got taken. The Steelers walked into the season with John Bostic and Vince Williams. They were fine with that. That didn't work out for them well at all. So the next year, Bostic's gone. They bring in, what was his name? Mark Barron to be that kind of coverage linebacker. And then they trade up in the draft to get Devin Bush. Well, yeah, they addressed the hole in free agency. Devin Bush gave him a player that was just like, boom, he's that player. If you can get him, you go get him. And they did. They went and got him. It didn't matter and they found ways to make it work. They played all those guys significant snaps. They all played. It worked. They'll find a way to make it work. So for me, going into the draft, expecting free agency, the Steelers are going to sign people to fill the obvious holes. Whether they're really the players you want or just a player, okay, we can live with this guy. They're going to fill those holes. Then when you hit the draft, they're going to look for that person that raises the level of play at that position the most, which does kind of rule out things like defensive tackle, because when you have a Tuitt and you have a Hayward, how much does a rookie bring? He's going to be a rotational piece, and that's it for his first year. If you look at a linebacker, yeah, you could get a linebacker in the first round if he's a really athletic, crazy fit, good fit for Devin Bush, where you're going to have just a dynamic linebacker duo back there in your base and in your nickel packages. That'd be worth it. If you're talking a third round guy, fourth round guy, nah. At that point, stick with Vincent and Robert Spillane. You're fine already. So that's kind of how the Steelers seem to approach the draft. Is they fill the holes with people who are adequate or better, depending on what's available in free agency and what's cheap. And then they will approach in the draft just neutral and be like, who's going to up the level of play the most.
Now, when we specifically look at the position of this team on top of that too, obviously the Steelers aren't going to be able to make some of these moves like they've had in years prior. And it could be that they slide in a vet minimum guy, but could they really anticipate someone with that low salary intake to really provide right away? I think they might have some glaring holes entering the draft. Which of the positions right now, as you see it, could the Steelers draft someone in the first round and that person having to have an immediate impact right away?
Tackle, offensive tackle, running back. They could go that way. Those are the big ones. Tackle and running back. Even like a tight end. Even if you draft a tight end, they're probably still keeping Ebron, and that guy's going to have a little leeway. So those are my big two. It's me, tackle, offensive tackle, and running back.
This is an interesting spot. What about center? That is a really hard position to step in day one, call out all the blocking schemes, work with Ben Roethlisberger. I know Marquise Pouncey did it, but he was a special talent, and I think we took that for granted a lot, especially with how many great centers this franchise has had. Could a day two center, even where the top two guys kind of project more, come into the lineup and start on day one?
No, I don't think so. You could with a round one guy, but I don't think there's anyone in there right now that you look at and say that's a guy that you would draft in the first round and plug into play in round one. Center is a position, I think you have to sign somebody. You have to pony up some money, sign a free agent, because there's no Marquise Pouncey in this draft. Marquise Pouncey he's a Hall of Fame center, and he was that guy from his rookie season. He came in and changed the overall impact of the Steelers offensive line a lot. He made that line a lot better just by showing up.
Now, one more thing with the center spot. There's a guy that, depending on who you ask, is either number one or the number two ranked center in the class. That's Creed Humphrey out of Oklahoma. He is left-handed when he snaps the ball. Do you think that is a factor that could raise a player up and down the draft board? Because we see it with quarterbacks, but as a center, me personally, I don't think I've ever seen a left-handed center ever before. Do you think that could impact his stock in any way?
I think some teams would view that, but I don't think that's a big issue. I mean, especially from shotgun snaps, the rotation of the ball is going to be a little different, but like really, if your quarterback is like, oh, the ball wasn't rotating the same way, like I can't catch the ball, well, like you've got problems. Like your quarterback has problems there. Ben Roethlisberger, I mean, Marquise Pouncey was never the best snapper, especially in shotgun. He just never was. But it didn't matter. Ben Roethlisberger corralled him. He brought him in, and it wasn't a problem for any time he got them, at least within Ben's ability to jump and reach the ball.
Right, and he had to do that a couple times, and one's already been eliminated from my memory bank. I'm not even going to bring it up. So we're going to move on to the next question instead. And that's because we are talking about offensive line a lot. Clearly, that is an issue. That's a need. The Steelers could have their starting unit be completely made up of guys that are either on the roster right now and perhaps one guy that's not on it, but that still won't mean they aren't going to draft offensive linemen. So how many do you think total could they potentially take in this year's draft?
I'm expecting 2. If they sign multiple free agents, you could see 1, but I could honestly see 3. I know some people are like, they need to draft offensive line every single pick. And I'm like, that's not something the Steelers have ever done. But I think you could see, especially if it's a first-round tackle and maybe a third-round center, something like that, you could then see them go back to it again in the 5th, 6th, or 7th round.
Yeah. It's kind of like when the Washington football team drafted RG3, then 2 rounds later took Kirk Cousins. Just really have to solidify the spot.
Yeah.
Oddly enough, the second guy they picked turned out to be much better. But anyway, continuing to look at the Steelers' draft needs, and this is something I know we talked about a little bit off air, but do you think the Steelers might be more willing to move someone up their draft board if it's a high positional need for an AFC North rival? Because, of course, we see the Browns and the Ravens picking just 2 spots back behind the Steelers. So clearly the Steelers could play that spoiler type of role. If you see the Browns and Ravens both needing a middle linebacker, perhaps the Steelers could scoop them up. Do you think they could do that, or is that just so far outside the realm of their philosophy that it would just never happen?
It would be awesome if the best guy available happens to be someone the Browns or Ravens really, really want, and we grab him. But that's it. If there's a stud inside linebacker available, and the Browns and Ravens are both like, yeah, we want that guy, the Steelers could also just be like, yeah, you know what? We also really want that guy, and we're going to take him. But I don't think they would move anyone around on their draft board just to spite a rival. It doesn't seem Kevin Colbert's style. It doesn't seem like Mike Tomlin's style. They are much more internally focused. Like, if we solve our own problems, then we should be able to beat those teams. We don't have to try and sabotage them.
Yeah, absolutely it is. And the Steelers, even to their own fault, are also a team that is very focused on just the upcoming season, not future seasons, which I suppose as we kind of move on in the future years here, something that they might have to do a little bit more, especially with some very marquee positions starting to become positions of need. Do you see the Steelers at all putting one eye towards the future and perhaps drafting a quarterback in the first round or perhaps the second round, or does it seem like that's completely off the table now?
I think that's completely off the table. The Steelers seem to have a different mentality towards building the future. And it's more like, you build the future by having a good team this year. You develop the talent you have by creating a winning culture now. And I think they're more about how they develop the players they get than trying to get a better shot at a top guy. Like Mike Tomlin told Chase Young, I hope I'm never in a position to draft a guy like you. Like, that's legit. That's how they view it. Like, you build a winning team by winning.
Yeah, and that's been the Steelers' MO for
long time,
forever, really. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I just don't see the Steelers doing anything completely out of the ordinary. But I ask you, what would be the biggest surprise in your opinion? Perhaps the Steelers making a big trade up or drafting a position that none of us expected, like a wide receiver in the first round. What would be the biggest surprise?
Biggest surprise in my mind would be them taking like a defensive tackle, where people would just be like, you have needs, man. Like Najee Harris is there, and there's some good left tackles there, and then they're like, yeah, we'll take a Christian Barmore, and I'd be like super pumped, and everyone else would be like, what is wrong with this team? Why would you take something you don't need?
Yeah, I definitely feel the same way with that. With this team having so many needs, I don't think there's too many spots I'd be surprised at, I would say. But if they were to take a corner, I wouldn't be happy, even if it was the top-rated guy. Now, my question to you is, do you have any faith in this team's ability to draft the corner position whatsoever?
I I am interested. Let me refresh. When was Justin Lane drafted? Was he 2018 or 2019?
19.
Oof.
With Devin Bush.
I like Austin Terrell as a defensive back guy. I don't know if he's a good drafter, but he's had good success with defensive backs, but not like developing them more. So not really. Like there's some defensive backs in this class I really like, and I think they have a profile that could fit the Steelers. Like I would love for the Steelers, if you're going to get a cornerback, what's the kid's name? Patrick Surtain Jr.
Alabama.
Yeah. He's going to know how to play NFL cornerback because he has people, right? If you have someone like that, like TJ Watt, you could take him on a team that doesn't really develop outside linebackers well, because in the offseason, he's learning from JJ Watt, right? Like he's learning moves from JJ Watt, not from whoever's coaching him at Pittsburgh. So to me, that kind of a situation is one you could go for defensive backs. Other than that, nah, man, don't draft a corner. We're so bad at that. Plus, I really like the fact that we have a Terrell Edmonds and we have a Minkah Fitzpatrick. This is one of the things I will eventually be covering in my off-season film rooms. The safeties make the cornerbacks' jobs easier. Safety is often an undervalued position in the NFL, but a really good safety and an athletic safety who can cover a lot of ground and can be very versatile in how they're used can really help cornerbacks. And we have two cornerbacks that, as long as you give them enough help, like they need a certain level of help, and if you give them that, they're outstanding. If you don't give them that, then they have weaknesses that start showing up. Like in 2019, Steven Nelson, you could beat him underneath because the Steelers had him playing back deep. This season, they changed that a bit, and the Steelers' pass defense numbers on his side of the field were incredible this season. They were the second best team for passes to the left side of the field. Like, why? Because he had Minkah and him working together better. Minkah and him really worked well together this year. He was able to play a lot more shorter routes and coverage, and he was phenomenal. He did it. They did it. They were the second least targeted and the second lowest yards per target of any team in the NFL with passes going to the left side.
So with that, what makes a team so good at drafting one spot? Like the Steelers do at receiver, which it seems 90% of the time they hit. But then on the flip side, teams like the Patriots can't draft a receiver worth the damn, or even the Steelers, like we just talked about in their cornerback spot. Is it just some dumb luck that they're so good at drafting these spots and so poor at drafting others?
I think there's multiple things coming into play there. For one, I think the Steelers drafting wide receivers is actually overrated. I don't think it's so much that they draft the wide receivers. I think it's how they use them. I think when they use them well, that's a big deal. Like even Juju Smith-Schuster, when they use him well and they had Antonio Brown, like it didn't matter. Like he was going to put up yards because teams weren't covering him. He had Ben Roethlisberger as his quarterback. That's starting to slow down a bit. You saw last year and the year before, like 2019, 2020, those wide receivers aren't lighting the world on fire. So I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that a lot of those guys we get credit for being like, whoa, they found Martavis Bryant, and wow, they found Emmanuel Sanders. Emmanuel Sanders was legit. He didn't fit here. But a lot of that is guys that were, across from Antonio Brown and, getting passes thrown to him by Ben Roethlisberger, who was, protected by an all-pro offensive line. Like they were in a very favorable situation and they produced.
Yeah, and with that too, like you said, the Ben Roethlisberger factor, and we are going to talk a lot about Ben Roethlisberger in the second part, so make sure you're hanging out for that. But that Ben Roethlisberger factor, how many guys, even before Antonio Brown, once they left the Steelers, look, it's Antonio Holmes. He kind of fell off when he went to New York. Mike Wallace, obviously, is one of the more famous ones, going to Miami, then Minnesota, then Baltimore. There's so many guys.
And then Mike Wallace, when he's like an older player, was going back praising people, being like, you don't know how good you have it playing for Ben Roethlisberger. Like, really, you have it good. And he's not lying. He should have taken that contract offer the Steelers offered him. He should have taken a slight less money to stay here because him and Ben were unstoppable. He went to places where guys couldn't hit him deep and he couldn't produce. And when he got back to guys who could throw deep, he produced well again, but never never like what he was doing with Ben Roethlisberger. Him and Antonio Brown would have been incredible. Incredible. You look at what Martavis Bryant and Sammy Coates when he could before his injury, what those guys are doing. Like, come on. Mike Wallace was much better than those guys. He would have absolutely torn it up with Ben.
Who knows? Mike Wallace could even be playing now if he took that deal.
Yeah. He's still fast.
Yeah. Yeah, and like we talked about Juju earlier in the show, perhaps he sees that with Mike Wallace saying stuff like that, looks at Le'Veon Bell. Guys leave Pittsburgh, and what happens? They tend to flame out. Now, going back to that Juju stuff we said earlier, if he went to the Steelers on his hands and knees and say, I'll play for a third of the money that I'm being offered by Oakland or whoever, do you think they still say sure, or do you think they just say, sorry, Juju, it's time for us to move on here?
Oh, I think they would pay him a decent. I think they would pay him more than that. I think they would actually pay a reasonable amount. I don't think they'll pay what he's going to get other places, because there's some teams that could really, really use him.
Now, back to the draft stuff and the skill positions specifically, especially your running back, which is a spot that the Steelers absolutely need to add someone. But by the looks of things, guys like Najee Harris or Travis Etienne should be available. If not both, at least one should be available when the Steelers are on the clock at pick 24. Are running backs worth the first-round pick in your mind?
They are if you're getting that guy like Josh Jacobs in Oakland, what he was able to do for them, like his first 2 years. Because really, if you're drafting a guy in the first round, in my opinion, you're drafting him for his first 2 seasons, because that's where you're going to get the most out of him. You're going to get that immediate boost on your offense. So I could see a Najee Harris kind of pick, just because you're saying, all right, give us 2 years of just fantastic running back play while Ben's older and we're in our window. We still think this window is open. Our defense is still here. Let's do this, kind of give us a huge boost there. Because running backs do. Their first couple of years, running backs are the most valuable draft picks in their first 2 years. Absolutely, in my opinion, the most valuable. After that, they start dropping off substantially. And in their second contracts, it's not like, what's the point? That's just the nature of the position, the nature of the NFL. So for me, yeah, a first round running back actually makes sense, because you're making that investment for right now, saying we don't need a guy who could be good. We need a guy who is going to be that impact player right now.
Now, I'll get your thoughts on this as well, but one of the things that I'm looking at when it comes to potentially taking a running back in the first round is that 5th-year option, which obviously is a really nice tool when it comes to any first-round pick. But when it comes to a running back, it's kind of a way to get another year out of a player, out of a position really that is known to fall off as soon as they hit that second contract. If after 4 years, let's just say Najee Harris is on the Steelers and has been lighting it up, they can give him that 5th year. And then if he has a great 5th year, then they can give him a franchise tag. And then after 6 years, you can say, we're not going to bet on you again. Sorry, you're more likely to fall off. Do you agree with that perhaps going running back in the first round makes a little bit more sense, because you kind of have that freedom to give them 1-year deals, whether or not they want to sign a 1-year deal?
Yeah, absolutely. Even with the reworking of that, so that now the 5th year is tied to the transition tag amount. So it's only it's a little bit less than the franchise tag, but it's still, you're not paying them, a $30 million signing bonus. You're not investing money for 5 years in a guy. You're just 1 year. So yeah, it makes all the sense in the world to me. And we saw Le'Veon Bell, man. Le'Veon Bell was the best running back in the NFL for 5 seasons. And what was that worth to him? What did he get for that? So for me, I don't know. That to me, just, I don't like it for the running backs. They're an incredibly valuable player. Everyone's like, running backs aren't worth anything. Well, that's because the rookie contract, the rookie slotted salary cap makes them worth a certain amount, because that's their best seasons. It's the one position that rookie slotting is really unfair to, is running backs, because they are worth more when you draft them than they ever will be.
Yeah, the hits they take, it just adds up so quickly. It's obvious why the position burns out. But with that being said, we are halfway through our show. So if you're listening on the audio platforms, wherever you listen to your podcast, you can click over to the second part now. If you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, just hang out with us. We will be back in just a second, and we will get into some Benjamin Todd or Roethlisberger talk. Of course, he's kind of the news maker of the week. So make sure you're clicking over or hanging out with us in the second part. Pittsburgh Steelers fans, once again, it is part 2 of the Curtain Call podcast. My name is Michael Beck, joined as always by Geoffrey, Benedict. Of course, that first half of our show talked a lot about the draft, but in more kind of pressing news before we even get to the draft, and this show is going to be getting to tons of draft content as the weeks go on. But, of course, Ben Roethlisberger, the news of the week, really, of all, I shouldn't say all sports, because there are some big news going out there. But when it comes to the Pittsburgh Steelers, at the very least, Ben Roethlisberger and Art Rooney both coming out and saying they want to work together, and that's what it looks like is exactly what's going to have happen. So, Geoffrey, what are your thoughts on just your early thoughts on hearing that we're going to get Ben for, I think this is his 18th season here in 2021?
Well, none of the stuff has surprised me. I have not been surprised yet because, in my view, I was like, until Art Rooney II says something about Ben moving on, I'm not going to believe it. The Rooneys have been ride or die with Ben Roethlisberger since they drafted him. And if you read Rooney's comments again, he's still on that train. They are still there. I've told you this before, not on the show, but I honestly think that they look at it and say, if Ben Roethlisberger plays in another uniform, then no, we've failed something. Ben Roethlisberger to them is a guy that should play every single snap of his career as a Pittsburgh Steeler. And imagine if like something crazy happened. Let's say, the Ben Roethlisberger, they cut him. He signed with another team, and then say like he's not playing well there, and someone gets hurt. Let's say Tom Brady gets hurt in Tampa Bay, and they swing a trade for Ben Roethlisberger early in the season, and he wins a Super Bowl with Bruce Arians. Something crazy stupid like that happens. The Steelers would never forgive themselves. Like, they would never get over that. The Rooneys would be like, he should have retired a Steeler. So I think they're going to make it happen. The interesting thing to me was his agent's comments. His agent, the comments his agent made, everyone was like, yeah, Ben's dedicated to being here. What I picked up from that is his agent, the way he said it was, Ben is committed to being here and to reworking his contract into a way that the salary, that it fits the salary cap structure. Did not sound anything like he was saying Ben's willing to take less money. That's what I got out of this week's news. I'm not surprised Ben's sticking around. I expected that. I'm not surprised that the Steelers want him. I expect that from the owner. But I am interested to see what this contract comes out as when they rework it. As
am I. Now, do you expect there to be voidable years where 2021 is essentially the last year of the deal, or do you expect there to be more playable years added onto the deal?
I expect there to be playable years. I don't expect the Steelers to do the voidable years thing. That's I don't know. I don't like it. It's like,
I don't think they've ever done it either.
Yeah, you give, like, Drew Brees had that contract that was a 5-year contract that was only 3 years and 2 voidable years, just so they could push his signing bonus even farther back. And then when he played again, they had to push it again. And he has 2 signing bonuses overlapping this coming season in dead money. Like, he's not even going to play. They just signed a deal so he could retire and spread it out even farther. So, like, 2 years from now, they're still going to have Drew Brees on their cap, like, because of void years. That's just dumb to me.
Yeah, this really is one of those situations where it's like, I don't really know exactly what to think until the paperwork has been signed. But your initial thoughts on this, are you happy that Ben Roethlisberger is going to be back for another year, or were you kind of someone that was hoping that they might try to do something different moving into the future?
I am always a person that firmly believes you are never as good as your best moments and you are never as bad as your worst. And Ben Roethlisberger is still a good quarterback. You look at the majority of his season was really good. He's a little bit older. You know, there's some things you have to do to help him, but I am excited to have Ben Roethlisberger back again. I am glad he's not ending his career with that loss to Cleveland. That he deserves better than that.
Now, what are your thoughts of the reports that there was a camp within the Steelers organization that didn't want Ben Roethlisberger with still on the team, and they wanted perhaps to move in a different direction? Now, with that, it could be someone like General Manager Kevin Colbert, but like we've talked about, Art Rooney is the man that he signs the check, so he makes the final decision if he wants to make a decision on things. So what are your thoughts on people on the inside saying that they think they want to move on from Ben Roethlisberger?
You always have coaches that want to put their stamp on a team. You always have that. And I can especially see it. I don't think Matt Canada is the kind of guy who would be like, I don't want Ben Roethlisberger back. I'm the offensive coordinator. Like, I don't want him back. I don't see that in his character and what we've seen of him at all. But I could see someone else looking at that situation and saying, you know what? Maybe we want something different. Like, I know Kevin Smith, who does a lot of film work, does a lot of stuff for us. He's a Ben Roethlisberger fan who looks at Matt Canada's offense and says, you know, maybe it's time to move on from Ben simply because he doesn't fit Matt Canada's best offenses. He just doesn't really fit it. Well, you're going to have to work around that for a year or two. You know, it'll be fine. The only way that would bother me is if like they fire Canada after 1 year because Ben Roethlisberger doesn't like his offense. That would be stupid. But I think they can make it work. I could see how someone could look at the situation and say, maybe we should move on from Ben. It would be for the best. But I think they're wrong. Like, you're just wrong. He's still good. Experience still matters. He's got that brain. He still has an arm. He can still throw the ball. Let him play.
Now, I had an article come out on Behind the Steel Curtain today on really saying the Steelers should be aggressive in making a move as early as this year to find their next quarterback, that being a trade up in the first round. I know Brooke Pryor of ESPN said she thinks the Steelers should take someone in the middle round to try to fill that void moving into the future. And one of the things we know for sure about 2022, 2 seasons from now, is the Steelers currently don't have any quarterbacks under contract to that point. Do you think the Steelers should be looking at someone to replace Ben Roethlisberger as early as this season, or is that completely out of the question?
I think they've done that. I mean, they signed Landry Jones a long time ago to be like kind of a developmental backup. And when they signed Mason Rudolph, that was a guy they said, hey, you know, he's got talent. He just needs to develop. And we're seeing it. We're seeing him play better. So to me, I think the pecking order is Ben and then Mason. I know the Steelers said if Ben retired, they were going to add to the quarterback room. But I think that's a situation where you would see them go out and pay a veteran to come in and be like, well, maybe Mason's not ready now. And he needs some veteran leadership in the room. I don't think that's a sign that they were going to go out and draft somebody. I don't think that. I think you're more looking at a veteran quarterback coming in into the room in that situation, kind of like they did when Michael Vick came, when Ben got hurt and they signed Michael Vick. Because they didn't want to put Landry Jones in there, and then Landry Jones outplayed Michael Vick. So I think it would be kind of in that situation more than they're going to draft someone new and go fully on. I think Mason Rudolph is your next Steelers quarterback after Ben Roethlisberger.
For the people that are mad at me in the chat that Dwayne Haskins is under control is the verbiage in 2022 as a restricted free agent. That's true. The Steelers do have his control, but they don't have any paperwork signed. Dwayne Haskins right now is basically a camp arm until he can prove that he's an NFL passer. So I would slow the Dwayne Haskins hype a little bit right now. At the end of the day, he is a veteran minimum player that was part of 4 names in a press release that didn't even get his own graphic. So I don't think the Steelers are extremely high on that move. And I think it's basically the same situation what they did with Paxton Lynch. So Geoffrey, in that sense, I'm curious what you think. Should the Steelers still bring in one more person with those 3 guys already here? Not necessarily to compete for a starting job, but at the very least to be an arm in training camp.
If they bring in a 4th, Josh Dobbs is out there. That's kind of my mindset. Ben's going to want him back again. So I think that's the kind of thing where, yeah, you've got a Josh Dobbs out there. You can just go grab. To me, Mason's as good as any backup in the league. Mason is as good as any backup quarterback in the NFL. So he's your guy. He's your backup. You've got Haskins as kind of like you said, the Paxton Lynch reclamation / development project. And if you need someone else, bring in a guy that Ben knows and Ben trusts and can, talk to him in the film room and speak to Ben and really communicate with him with what they're seeing.
Charlie Batch, here we go. We're running it back.
Yeah, that Charlie was great in that role.
With Mason Rudolph, though, say Ben Roethlisberger does retire at the end of this season. This is his one last run. What could a contract look like? Just roughly. Do you think he's someone that should command that lower starter money, like a $15 million season or per season, I should say, or is he still not worth? Like, I know some people will freak out at that number, but we've seen guys like Jacoby Brissett make exactly that with the Indianapolis Colts when he was first handed over the keys to that offense. And that was a couple years ago. Now, do you foresee a deal like that to Mason, or if he doesn't play a snap this year, does he get anything more than another 1-year deal? Or what do the Steelers do with Mason Rudolph at quarterback if Ben's not back next year?
If Ben plays this whole season and he's not back next year, is Mason's not going to be a restricted free agent, is he? He's going to be unrestricted. Yeah. So yeah, you'd have to make him an offer. You'd almost have to. You can't go into the next season with nothing. So, man, money-wise, though. See, Brissett got a lot of money because of the Patriots. He was in that whole crew. There, people were just like, oh, Bill Belichick and Tom Brady touched this guy at some points. Like, they both probably touched him. So let's sign that guy and let's pay him a bunch of money. Same with Jimmy G. Jimmy G's a good starting quarterback. He's not worth at all what they signed him to. So for me, Mason, with the way quarterback money is now, man, in 2022, for goodness sakes, Mason, like $15 million could be like nothing quarterback wise. For that could be like that could be Devlin Hodges money, for all we know. You know what I'm saying? Like the cap's going to go up and it's going to get crazy. Talking with last year's economy, I'd say he's probably a 10 to 12 million contract. I don't know where it's going to be in 2022. It's going to be crazy land.
Oh, I could just hear the fan base melt if that's the deal they sign him to. But that's what a quarterback's going for. So I'm sorry to break it to you. If someone's a starting quarterback, they're entering a season as a starting quarterback. They know the offense. They got a lot of leverage, especially with the Steelers currently not having anyone signed to a deal in 2022. Mason Rudolph would have a ton of leverage and could make a decent amount of coin. Yeah,
them throwing like an original round tender on Dwayne Haskins isn't gonna solve their issues.
No, exactly. Now, in this sense, with Ben Roethlisberger coming back and him doing his thing, you see it a lot, especially within the Pittsburgh media, suggesting that this team's just spinning their tires. Perhaps instead of being a team that would have went like 6-10, now they're back up to like a 9-7 team. Just for example, do you buy into that at all? That the Steelers are spinning their tires, and is there any worry that they could just be in that kind of 8-8 purgatory for the next couple of seasons?
No, not at all. I mean, this team went 8-8 with Devlin Hodges and Mason Rudolph. That defense is not falling apart. Like they might drop off a bit even, but I doubt that. If Devin Bush is healthy, they're going to be phenomenal. So no, absolutely not. The Steelers were 8-6 or 8-5. They were 8-5, and Ben Roethlisberger was 0-2. With Mason Rudolph and Devlin Hodges, the Steelers went 8-3 before you get those last 3 games of the season where Buffalo really exposed Hodges, and everyone followed suit after that. Like, Devlin Hodges was not an NFL quarterback, and the Steelers were 8-3 with him and Mason Rudolph, who is better now than he was then. Steelers are not going to be a team that just falls apart. For goodness sakes, this franchise put Tommy Maddox in the playoffs. This franchise put, Mike Tomczak in the playoffs. They can do it with Mason Rudolph. They can do it with guys. They can do this with whoever. Like, they can win with whoever.
Why do you think the media is so negative towards Ben Roethlisberger?
Man, we're going to dig up some old stuff with that. It goes all the way back to that motorcycle helmet. That's the biggie. Everyone, but you also have his first 2 seasons, his ESPN's QBR, which was basically invented to be like, we need something that shows that Ben Roethlisberger is not a better quarterback than Tom Brady. Because passer rating was saying, quarterback rating itself was saying Ben Roethlisberger is up there with Peyton Manning and better than these guys, and he's better than Tom Brady. So they invented QBR to be like, yeah, this kid takes too many sacks, he doesn't throw the ball away. We need to, there's factors in there that were brought in simply to say, whoa, chill on this whole Ben Roethlisberger kid. And then he wrecks a motorcycle with no helmet, and everyone's like, how dumb is this kid? How dumb and selfish is this young man? And then you have the allegations. Arizona, you have Georgia. He's winning Super Bowls, but at the same time, he always has something there that's saying, whoa, okay, we don't want to praise this guy too much. We don't want to like this guy. And then he often comes across kind of like a douchebag. He just comes across as that dude. He's not good with the media. And he sometimes I think sometimes he just tries too hard to say the right things, and it comes across really bad. It comes across very disingenuous and kind of snarky and passive aggressive. So he's that guy, and as a kid and as a young guy, he got a little entitled and wasn't a leadership. So you had guys like Hines Ward calling him out, and I would say rightfully, Hines Ward was in a position to call him out. And if he doesn't listen when you call him out in the team, call him out in public. That's what you do. It's a problem that had to be fixed. When Ben Roethlisberger isn't taking a leadership role on the team, even though he's your Super Bowl winning quarterback, you got to fix that. You can't just let that go, or you're going to end up with, complete dysfunction on your organization and in your team. And he responded. He became a better leader, but he's just that guy. And he's got enough water under the bridge that there's people that are never going to like him. And he's not. There's a lot of people in Steelers Nation that have a hard time liking Ben Roethlisberger because of his history, because of how he comes across. And so it's just, to me, it's just always going to be that way. His personality plays into it. Mistakes he's made in the past. There's so many things that come into play where people have just for a long time been looking at Ben Roethlisberger and saying, no, he's not that guy. He's not this. He's not the face of the NFL. He's not, one of these elite quarterbacks. He's not one of the guys we want to promote in commercials. You're not putting Ben Roethlisberger in, the Peyton Manning commercials where he's kind of poking fun at himself. You're not going to put him in those. It's not going to work. So that's my view of Ben Roethlisberger. It's just he's not that guy. He's not media friendly. He's not television savvy. And he's made choices in the past that are hard to like.
Yeah. Ben Roethlisberger, he's not the guy with the GQ Tom Brady look or that uber charisma that Peyton Manning has, that he could host SNL however many times he did, and all those award shows and commercials, et cetera, et cetera. Peyton Manning, like him or not as a football player, you cannot deny his charisma. But there's so many factors of these other great quarterbacks, like the generosity of Drew Brees, and it just kind of goes on and on. When it comes to Ben Roethlisberger, it seems like all his off the field stuff has been basically purely negative, and I think that is a factor that will probably haunt his legacy to a degree. But one of my questions to you is whether or not you think his career outside of football might hurt his chance of being a first ballot Hall of Famer. And one of the reasons why I do bring this up is someone like Peter King didn't want to vote for Troy Polamalu because he thought Troy Polamalu was going to get in anyway. But then a year later, he votes for Peyton Manning to get in. So it's like, seems to be a little bit of a double standard with some of these voters. A lot of voters just, for petty reasons, don't vote for players. Like Terrell Owens, for example, wasn't a first ballot guy because too many of the people with votes said he's too much of a diva and hurt his team. Do you think that there could be reason to believe why Ben Roethlisberger might not be a first ballot guy?
I don't think he will be. And I think specifically for that, people don't like him. And they're not going to want to vote him in. They're not going to want to put him in that top tier. They never have wanted to have him be that face of the NFL, player of the generation type of role. They never want him in that role because of his off the field stuff. Now, I do want to give credit here. If you remember back, I don't know how many people remember this. It stood out to me big at the time. When Ben Roethlisberger had that second accusation come in, the Steelers, there was talk that the Steelers might get rid of him. He met and was mentored by a lot of different people, but one of them was Ray Lewis. Ray Lewis was one of them. And if you remember, Ray Lewis had that run-in that threatened to derail his entire career where he was, murder investigation here. And Ray Lewis was just outside of that and kind of involved in like, were you a part of this is a serious question that was involved there. After that happened and he weathered that, the only things you ever heard about Ray Lewis was his team and his charity work. That's it. Ben Roethlisberger did the same thing. All you heard about Ben Roethlisberger was him saying the right things about the team, playing football, and then you'd hear about, police dogs. Ben Roethlisberger and police dogs. That lasted until Antonio Brown and him, like, both kind of blew up that relationship. I put a lot of that on Ben. I honestly, the public part of it, I think there were problems behind the scenes before then, but Ben really was just, I think he pushed the buttons to say, hey, you know what? I'm tired of putting up with this. And he's not helping the team enough. Like, this has become a problem. So I'm just going to poke him and blow it up so that they have to deal with him. And he did. It worked. They had to get rid of Antonio Brown, and it probably has worked to the Steelers' benefit. I don't know. But to me, yeah, Ben Roethlisberger, I don't know. I don't think he's a first ballot.
Yeah, I think that's something that might require a deep dive, especially when we see who retires next year. Of course, Frank Gore, Larry Fitzgerald, two guys that it appears like both want to come back for another season. Those are two outstanding citizens, and you can absolutely count on Larry Fitzgerald being a first ballot guy. I would say absolutely. Frank Gore, even though he's been quiet, he's absolutely deserving as well. And thankfully, Phillip Rivers, Drew Brees going out this year. So 5 years from now, there's another two. So it really depends on who else retires. And who knows, what if Tampa Bay somehow won another Super Bowl and Tom Brady decides to hang him up? Then all of a sudden you can easily see a world where Ben Roethlisberger doesn't get in as a first ballot guy.
Yeah, if Tom Brady and Ben Roethlisberger retire in the same year, they're not going to put another quarterback in the same season they put Tom Brady in. Yeah, they're not going to do it. That's going to be an interesting season because you have those years where like they do something special where they want it to be kind of special. And I could see Tom Brady's class being one of those classes where they're like, we don't really want to vote in anyone else. Like, this is one of those things you could see where like the Hall of Fame class is Tom Brady. And like no other, maybe a veteran player, maybe like a contributor, but not like peers of his. Unless they're really, like if him and Larry Fitzgerald retired, they put them both in. But, if they're not a clear-cut first ballot Hall of Famer, they might not get in that year just because they don't want to put you in the class with Tom Brady.
I know Steeler fans will hate it, and like, so what? But Tom Brady, 7 rings currently. He's going to hold every passing record by a lot by the time he hangs his cleats up. They might even waive that 5-year period for him. Like, I think something special is required for him. He's been a thorn in our side for so many years, but I think Tom Brady probably gets something special. Now, one of the things I want to bring up here is Kenneth McNair Jr. saying Frank Gore is not a Hall of Famer. That's a pretty bold take. Frank Gore, if I'm not mistaken, is either the second or third leading rusher in the history of the National Football League. No running back has played more games of professional football than Frank Gore. Frank Gore is arguably one of the best running backs of the past 20 years. The thing is, he just doesn't talk. He's never talked. He's never been in the media. They don't talk about Frank Gore, but he's the model of consistency. I know it's not on Steelers topic, but Geoffrey, what do you think about a take like that?
I think Frank Gore is absolutely a Hall of Famer. I mean, there are the people who will say he was never the top player. He was never one of the top players, but he has spent so long in that top, 2 tiers of NFL talent at running back. I just looked up, he has 5 Pro Bowls. There's a lot of running backs that don't get that many. There's a lot. How many? I don't know. I'd have to look it up. But how many Pro Bowls did Jerome Bettis get? Frank Gore is on that level. But he also happened to have played more than anyone else and has insane yardage gathered. And when you consider where he ranks all time, and the guy who's number 1 on that, the teams that guy played for, Emmitt Smith, Frank Gore, to me, is an Emmitt Smith level running back who just never was on a team, was never in a league, was never in an era where he would look like an Emmitt Smith. But Frank Gore was that kind of player. He was that level of player.
Yeah. I just find it hard to believe a world where Frank Gore doesn't eventually end up in the Hall of Fame. And I could definitely see him ending up as a first ballot guy. I believe over 15,000 rushing yards, just absolutely ridiculous numbers. And he's done it on some historically bad teams too. He was through the 49ers downslide and then bounce back, and Indianapolis with Andrew Luck, a few good years there. Then New York in their terrible season a year ago. He was still one of the only reasons they had any production whatsoever. So potentially Frank Gore, who knows where he ends up this final year that it appears to be for him. I know he's leaning towards going back to San Francisco for one more year. Could be a nice little story for him to wind his career down there. But as we are getting to the end of our show here, is there any other thoughts you want to share on Ben Roethlisberger and his situation with the team and where that might move forward from here?
A couple things I want to talk about with him really quick. I see a lot of Browns fans being like, yes, Ben Roethlisberger's back. The Steelers are going to suck. And when I think about that, I just want to point this out, that the Ben Roethlisberger played in 2 games against the Cleveland Browns this season. And in those games, the Steelers scored 38 points and 37 points. So, yeah, he had some bad games in there, but if you're a Cleveland fan, don't be excited that Ben Roethlisberger's back. Don't make that mistake. And for Steelers fans that are doubting him, seriously, this offense, when they were healthy enough that they were only down 1 or 2 offensive linemen, they scored 30 points a game. If you take out the games that J.C. Hassenauer was forced to play, I don't want to rip on this guy because he's a young kid. He makes the roster. He's a developmental center kind of guy, hard worker. Everything about him says, this is the kind of guy you want on your team. But right now, he wasn't ready to be thrown into the situation he was thrown in. He was thrown in as a starter next to an injured David DeCastro, who was playing hurt and struggling, and asked to anchor the line like Marquise Pouncey was, and he wasn't up to it. You're not up to that. This is his first NFL action, and he's playing against, he played against 2 guys that started that were way better than him in Alabama on his own team in Washington, and they destroyed him. They absolutely were just like, hey, buddy, I remember you. How you doing? We're going to take your lunch money today. And they did. But if you take those games, when J.C. Hassenauer played, the Steelers scored 18 points a game. If you just look at Ben Roethlisberger and J.C. Hassenauer, it drops to 17 points a game. When J.C. Hassenauer didn't play at least 25% of snaps, the Steelers scored 30 points a game. They had the Todd Haley offense that Todd Haley never could have with old Ben Roethlisberger, old washed up Ben Roethlisberger. You want to see him play late in the season with a healthy offensive line? Look at the Indianapolis game. Look at the second half of that game. He still has it. isn't the guy that can win without an offensive line. And people are like, oh, then if he can't do that, then he should quit. Well, then Patrick Mahomes should quit, right? If Ben Roethlisberger should quit playing football because he can't win with an offensive line that is failing him, then Patrick Mahomes should quit because he also didn't. And how about last year, Tom Brady, 2019 Tom Brady? Tom Brady should hang it up. His offensive line failed him, and guess what? He got beat up and he stunk for some of those games. So, Steeler fans, if you're sitting here saying Ben Roethlisberger is washed up, he needs to hang it up, I'm sorry to tell you this, but you're wrong. You're just wrong. The offensive line absolutely fell apart. And he still, until it got bad enough that J.C. Hassenauer was playing, they were good. So Ben Roethlisberger, one more year, we're going to be okay. We're going to be good.
Yeah. There's some bad takes filling the chat here, so I'm going to take my eyes off that. But Just Me puts $5 in the tips jar. Throws this out to us as our show's coming to a close, but she asked, who is your first round pick? Geoffrey, I'll let you start off with that.
Best offensive tackle. That's my first round pick, is just grab that offensive tackle. I think that's a position that they really, really need to invest big in. But if I have to pick a player, it's Christian Barmore from Alabama. I love that guy. I love it. Maybe it's just COVID, and I'd really like to Barmore, but I can't go out much. So I don't know. That was a bad joke. that was bad.
I've heard it twice, so the reaction wasn't as big the second time. But for me, it depends who's there. If Darisaw is available, I would love that. That would be a huge win. That's probably the third best tackle of the draft. And he's a really good one at that. That would be huge if he were to slip. I got a feeling the Steelers are very, very high on Najee Harris, especially with the Dolphins' apparent mutual interest with Aaron Jones. If that's where he winds up, I could definitely see a world where the Steelers go running back in round one, regardless of how we feel about it. I could see it going that way. But Geoffrey, as we're heading out here, what do you got going on? I know you had a Vertex just come out, but what can fans expect from you?
Yeah, I just had a Vertex on Steven Nelson come out that, he's gotten some flack because advanced stats, said with air quotes, say he wasn't as good this year, but he had a phenomenal season. So look for that. Co-wrote that with Dave Schofield. I've got a film room coming out later this week on Deontay Johnson in week 7. That's really going to go into Deontay Johnson and what I see on film, both the good and the bad from him. And I'm also working on a series where I'm going to go through each position on the roster and look at what the Steelers have, what they need, and what kind of players. Not necessarily names. I'll probably give a name for each one, but not necessarily names, but more the kind of player you should look for the Steelers to possibly sign in either free agency or the draft to fill holes in each roster spot.
Awesome. I am definitely looking forward to that as well. And then special stuff on our show. As the weeks go on here, we're going to be bringing more guests, more along the lines of Know Your Enemy back during the season. So expect some guests to kind of help us break down the draft, break down some prospects, and how that all kind of fits together with the Pittsburgh Steelers. So with all that said, make sure you're clicking over to the website. That is behindthesteelcurtain.com. Make sure you're listening to all of our podcasts wherever you get your podcasts from, or right here on YouTube or Facebook. So make sure you're subscribing, hitting 5 stars, hitting the like button, just doing whatever you can to support the show. So thank you so much for tuning in. We will see you guys next week.